Welcome to Renegade Thinkers Unite, featuring the sharpest minds in marketing, inspirational case histories, and weekly insights you can apply to your business. Find out why top CMOs rank this podcast among their favorites. Now, here's your host, Chief Marketing Renegade, Drew Nizer.
Have you ever noticed that the companies that do the best content marketing are often the purveyors of products or services that enable content marketing? I mean, HubSpot was one of the great ones. Marketo, Eloqua in its day, Content Marketing Institute, and Skyward. These are all companies that do incredible content. Well, yeah, duh, they're selling content marketing as a tool. And it makes sense. These folks are simply drinking their own champagne. But one of the things that occurred to me is, because there's so much interest in content marketing in the marketplace right now, that if you're creating content about content marketing, you're going to get a lot of interest. It's a lot harder if you're selling something B2B that just doesn't have that broad interest. It's a lot harder to come up with interesting content. So it's a challenge, and I know that many of you in B2B land are struggling with your content. It's just clear. There's lots of reasons for it, and we're going to dive into those because my guest today is Randy Frisch, who is the president and CMO of Uberflip, and yes, they're a company that helps, that enables content marketers to do it a little better. Randy will tell us about that. But first, Randy, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks, Drew. And that intro was so spot on because that's like what keeps me up at night, right? It's we have to drink our own champagne, eat our own dog food, whatever analogy you like. And anytime I hire a marketer here, I always say to them, like, this is a dream job, but be careful what you ask for because you are marketing to marketers who are pretty damn smart, right? And they will snip through that dog shit if it's no good, right?
It's so true. And as you can say, you can polish a turd all day long, as one of my former creative directors used to say, and it's still a turd. So anyway, one of the things that I noticed right away is you're president and CMO, and it's been very strange lately because I've had talked to a lot of CMOs that have this dual job, COO and CMO, CTO and CMO, but you're president and CMO. So, how do you decide what you do every day?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, my path here has been interesting. I mean, as you hit on out of the gate, we are a MarTech solution. I think a big reason for that is both myself and my co-founder are marketers at heart. So in the early days, my co-founder is more the product guy, CEO. We're a very product-led company. And I did a lot of the marketing very early days. And then I got out of the way and hired people who could focus on that. Well, we were scaling and I had to focus on operations. And it was about just over 2 and a bit years ago, I decided, I want to get back to what I love and back to what I want to focus on, which is marketing. And so the president part is really a reflection. To be honest, I don't think I ever really use that other than when I have to sign something. But there's a lot of BD efforts where that sometimes is the right play for me to wear. I have an interesting lens here at Uberflip as CMO because I also have our finance team, customer success team who report into me, given that I am one of the founders of the company.
Right. Okay. So that's a really interesting moment because you're the CMO who's applying for the budget and you're the president who's approving the budget. So it shouldn't be hard to get your budget.
It's a great point. I mean, part of the way I've kind of self-regulated that and made sure that I'm honest, if you will, is I hired a very strong demand gen number 2 always on my team. Who's very responsible for that budget, who's very responsible for making sure that, that we're on the right path. A large part, I think, of a lot of CMOs of growing tech companies and even larger enterprise companies that have achieved scale is evangelism, right? And especially when you're trying to disrupt the norms of what might be out there, which is quite often what you see with a MarTech platform these days is, the way we used to do it just won't cut it anymore, or we're doing it in this silly way and we have to overcome that. Not even in MarTech, we see that all over the place, right? There's great examples like Uber, right? No relation between Uberflip and Uber, by the way, but like I heard someone say this recently, which is like Uber had to teach us to like change the way we approach something that we grew up our whole lives learning, which was like never get into a stranger's car, right? Like
right.
That's messed up. Or, you look at a company like DocuSign, who's one of our customers, the idea that we would have to literally sign with a pen and paper a document versus changing it to, the trust levels that we get to. And that requires, yes, a strong CEO, but I think it requires, the skills that are often in a CMO to get out there on the road and really say like, the way we're doing this just isn't going to cut it anymore. And we have to change, we have to disrupt. And that's a big part of my role here between, the different job titles, if you will, that I've got to, take on a business card.
It makes sense. And it's funny, I had Dux Raymond of AvePoint on the show, and that's really how he defines his job is as an evangelist, although he didn't use the words exactly. Also for those folks, and we'll reference it in the show notes, we had Scott Orge of DocuSign on the show, and that was an interesting episode on how he sort of reinvented and redefined the brand. Okay, so your priority is obviously growth. You're a startup company. You started in 2012, as I remember, and you're Canadian based, right? In Toronto, or where are you based?
Absolutely, Toronto. I like fit every stereotype. Tonight I will be coaching hockey for one of my sons, and Friday morning for a different one. So I pretty much do it all, eh?
Hey, I would expect you to be out and about, and I'm looking for you to open a beer can soon. We could do it if you want.
Only if you'll join.
We could do that. We could just sort of pop those open. I was listening to the show where I heard those cans, and then the host said, no, that's just soda, folks. Not that would have mattered. All right, because we got to have fun on these shows. So, your top priority is growth, and let's talk about when you look at the job of the CMO and you say, all right, my top priorities are right now, 1, 2, 3, what are they?
Sure. It's a great question. And I'm really grateful you're not making me pick one because, man, that's just too hard. I'll go with one that I think falls a lot on me, and then I'll kind of work down to ones that are team-wide. One that's really big on me right now is category creation. This comes back to what we were just chatting about, which is disruption and, changing the way people see things. The need to get people to see the light, and that's everything from our customers, the market as a whole, even spending a lot of time with analysts, which is something, that I've probably spent a lot of my time over the last 6 months, and, calls with groups like Forrester and Gartner and the likes, and really spending time, which is, it's an interesting process because you need a balance trying to preach your ideas and your propaganda, but also listen to their input and insight. And it's been an interesting process, spending a lot of time. And, for the first time for us, we started to really invest a lot of money on that front in terms of the relationships that we have with these analysts, which we couldn't do when we were a true early stage startup. But now that we're more in the growth phase, that's become a trend.
Go ahead.
Yeah,
let's stop there for a second, because I think it's interesting, and obviously talk to a lot of B2B CMOs, and what I think you're saying, and I'm fairly certain, is what you want to make sure of is if you can define the category, the segment that you're in, as something new, then you would be the leader of that segment, right? And so you have this thing called content experience platform. So if Gartner says, hey, there's these things called content experience platform, you would naturally sort of zoom up to the top of that. We talked about a little bit like that with Gabby from Affectiva, who created this notion of emotion AI, a brand new way of thinking about, AI. And by creating a category, it's like, yeah, we're the leader. And is that what we're talking about here?
Yeah, absolutely. There's definitely a part of that. It's interesting. We had our fiscal kickoff here last November, December timeframe, and I have a good relationship with some of the founders of Eloqua, one of the who you mentioned out of the gate. They're local Toronto guys as well. and we invited them to come in and talk to our team. And we just wanted our team to hear from a company and founders of an organization that saw huge success exiting to Oracle, going public along the way and everything with that. And it was really funny to hear them describe, because I think to all of us, we think of something like marketing automation platforms as like truly mainstream now, right? It's like, if someone's not using one, it's what is wrong with them, right? If they're not using a Marketo or an Eloquent or Pardot or whatnot. But he was describing this time in their early existence where they could only describe them as weird marketers. He was like, they were just these weird marketers who cared about data and cared about like analyzing what was working. And you can see as they're describing it, all of my demand gen team sitting there just laughing, because they acknowledged that there was a time where they were weird marketers, but the masses just couldn't understand. They couldn't come to terms with it. And I think that's that point that we're all looking for, is when weird becomes mainstream. And then a big part of that is, how do we create a category that people can identify with? In the space that I'm in, very, very particularly, take as an example, even if we don't use an analyst group, but we can get to that later, but say G2 Crowd. So if you know G2 Crowd, they're like a peer review site where we can get input from our peers and people out there in the market, how they're using different technology. And they had a landscape that we would have tried to figure out a way to fall into for content marketing. But the problem on that landscape was you had solutions that were very catered to content creation, like how do we workflow our content creation? How do we plan for it? Marketplaces, companies you mentioned in your intro, like Skyward. They also had companies in there that handled distribution, companies like Outbrain and Taboola. Like, they did nothing alike. And then they had companies like us who did nothing like any of those other ones. In fact, we partnered with some of them. So, what is a consumer supposed to do other than trying to evaluate those against each other and just walk away completely, at loss of what step to take first as a CMO?
So first, number one is sort of trying to define or redefine what your category is, and finding the influencers out there that are helping people sort through these decisions, which are really important in B2B. Okay, I get that one. What's the sort of, if you were to look at right now, your sort of in the last year or two as CMO, what do you think the most renegade thing you've done that's helped stop there. What's the most renegade thing you've done?
Oh man. So I can't choose. We like to kind of have fun here with marketing. As we said out of the gate, we're marketing to marketers. So we got to catch them off guard. They're ready for just about anything. So I'll give a couple of things we can talk about. One, ties back to, what we just talked about, which is category creation. And what we did there is I wrote a blog post that, to be very honest, we were very renegade at first because my team wouldn't let me publish it for about 4 months. I wrote this thing on a plane ride to Dreamforce. It was one of those Jerry Maguire manifesto type of moments where I was just like really frustrated. The post title was really what they couldn't get by. It was titled "Fuck Content Marketing." I apologize for that. Maybe I should have given the censor.
No, it's okay. It's all right. We've already decided the show will be for adults only.
Exactly. So it was "Fuck Content Marketing" and focus on content experiences. The category, and it took them some time, because even my own team, they're like, you're going to offend every customer that we have, not from the category alone. There are people whose job title is content marketer, right? But what I had to explain to them was I wasn't actually telling content marketers to go F off. In fact, if they actually got to the point of reading the blog post, which my team finally did, they would realize that I was kind of advocating for them, of saying, what's the point of creating all this content if at the end of the day we're not going to leverage it, right? If we're not going to embed it in our campaigns. And it was really a rally call that took some time for even our own team. And that's why I kept pushing. Like, when my own team's pushing against it, I know that there's like, sometimes I have to listen, but we also have to decide, like, maybe that is that renegade moment.
And I love it.
For us, it's become that. I've since I've written a book, which is launching on March the 6th of this year. That's titled "Fuck Content Marketing." And as my wife said, she was just in an airport in New York yesterday. She's like, "I think you're really on trend because there's like an F-bomb on every 10th book that she's seeing at the airport bookstore."
It's true.
So it's I think we're getting comfortable with rising against the norm, or being renegades, as you like to call it, Drew.
All right. Well, we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to just keep talking about, fucking content marketing. All right. We'll be right back.
You've been listening to another great interview on Renegade Thinkers Unite with Drew Neiser. But the value doesn't end there. As a listener, you can download a free ebook from Drew, Renegade Thinkers, interviews with 11 trailblazing CMOs any business can learn from. Top marketing thought leaders and proven executives from Time Warner, American Express, and Chico's, and others. Get your free copy at renegadethinkersunite.com/ebook. For listeners only, at renegadethinkersunite.com/ebook.
Okay. So we are going to set a record, I think, for the F-bomb on this show. I'm fairly certain. It's certainly not the first time, though. I think it was Jackson Jeremiah from Boxed who had the record early on. Anyway, a couple things you said I think are really interesting. And first, look, it's a provocative headline, and fundamentally, one of the reasons that content marketing doesn't typically work is that it doesn't cut through. It doesn't get anybody's attention. I read the post that you're talking about. I love the way you said, now it's almost like, I got your attention, now let me pay this off. And so that's the tricky part of a headline like that, right? Is that you better be able to pay it off, and you better be able to keep that tone going. A couple of things come to mind. One is that you're a CMO and you write, which I think is really important in all of this conversation because you are expressing a point of view for the company. You also mentioned that marketing to marketers is hard. Yeah, it's like, as they say, blowing smoke at smoke blowers. It's a difficult thing. All right. So, and then the last thing I wanted to sort of circle back on, and I love this, it's like usually it's the president CMO who's rejecting the crazy idea from the kids. Here it was the other way around. And I thought that's a leadership moment.
Yeah, I think, listen, back to this idea of writing and being out there and getting on the phone as a CMO, that's how you get your ideas, right? I mean, you run this podcast, and I'm willing to bet, Drew, that's the same as my podcast that I run, where a lot of the ideas that fuel what I push onto my team and what I experiment come from the podcast I run every week. I'm talking to marketing leaders, and they're trying all these different things, and it just challenges my thinking. And it's something that I've tried to really bring into the definition of my idea of an ideal CMO. One of the things, if people choose to follow me, the channel I'm probably most active on is LinkedIn. And about a year ago, I'd say, I said, I'm going to start to share some of my ideas, not just to advocate and everything we've been talking about, but just to get conversations going, because I love the podcast experience so much. And what I've found amazing is that when you get out there and you share these ideas, and LinkedIn's a great format for it because of video and the way we're looking to engage these days, you can start conversations by tagging people in there. And I know some people are against that, but I think it's great.
I'm all in. Yeah.
Tag
away, folks.
Yeah. Someone shared with me, I think it was yesterday, a couple of days ago, this post about how tagging people is like so inappropriate because you're just looking for validation in a shameless way. And I'm like, no, I'm just looking to stir shit up and let's have a conversation. And I love when people disagree, right? Like, my least favorite thing at any conference I go to is panels. I hate panels. Like, they're terrible because everyone agrees.
Yeah.
It's like they're up on stage. They feel like they can't defend each other. or the questions are all softballs, like we're interviewing a sports athlete at the end of the game, right? Like, on LinkedIn, on these different channels where we can write, where we can share opinion, we can try things. We can, have an editorial view, and we can see how our audiences respond at the end of the day.
So, one of the things that I'm hearing loud and clear is you need to have a strong point of view with your content. You need to be willing to take a side. You need to be able to take a risk and so forth. And you're doing that with sort of personal brand. But it's also a message to your customers. You're telling them, hey, dudes, if you're being boring, no one's going to pay attention. So again, you're sort of leading by example, although they may not choose to use expletives in their headlines. You are challenging them to cut through. And I believe that all of this is not simply gorilla in a jockstrap, because the old, marketing, you can put a gorilla in jockstrapping and everybody will pay attention, but they'll never remember the brand. And what's the strategy unless you're selling jockstraps for gorillas? So you can get attention, but I think this attention that you're getting is all part of this bigger story that you're telling, which is this whole content experience platform, right? There's method to your madness. You're not just coming up with one idea today and one idea tomorrow. It seems to be there's some cumulative effect here, right? There is a goal, a story that you're trying to tell.
Absolutely, yeah. There's a goal and there's a need for consistency, as I think you're hitting on, Drew. We have to be careful, whether it's you as the CMO or whether it's your marketing team or your organization as a whole, who's going to take that renegade mindset and going to try and stir things up every once in a while. You've got to be consistent in your views, right? And you've got to be trying to build something and build a following. That I think that's a big part of it. One of the things that we do, because when it comes at the end of the day, you're right. Like, our goal is to get people to think about content experience in our case, but that doesn't mean that we can only talk about content experience. In fact, I kind of had this realization one day. I always screw up sayings, but it's if a tree falls in the forest and no one's there, does it make a noise, right?
Right. Yeah, that's something like that. Yep.
And so I thought to myself, like, if there's a conference and I'm not there, does anyone actually talk about content experience? Right? And I was like, all right, because I know if I'm there, I'm like making a big deal of it. I'm doing a keynote or whatever it is, and hopefully people are then talking about it in the hallways. But if I'm not there, are they doing so? So one of the things that I looked at was how do we shake up the stories that we tell as an organization, and, if you will, Trojan Horse in our big idea with the things that people do talk about. So what we did at one point, and a lot of your listeners are marketers, so they'll relate to this. We said, what are the things that people do talk about when we're not there? Like, marketers are passionate. And when they jump into the hallways at a conference, or they go out for beers after that conference, or, they get on a podcast like this, they're probably talking about, trending things like demand generation, sales enablement, potentially content marketing or email marketing. And maybe the last one that, I feel like you can't finish a podcast without saying ABM, right? It's like, if we ever played that shot drink, we'd be drunk by the end of it. Anyone that we did, if we had to take a shot for every ABM mention. So what we did is we said, okay, well, that's what people are talking about. Like, when we're not there and that's our goal, they're talking about those topics. So why don't we start to change the narrative of how we go to market, and not always just try and preach our big crazy idea, but comment on these other trending topics. And then, as I put it, Trojan Horse in the idea of what we do. So at a very high level, instead of us writing an ebook that said why content experience is the be all end all, we would write an experience that says, an ebook rather, that says, how to rock ABM with a focus on content experience, right? This isn't rocket science as to what we're doing, but what we're really trying to do is make sure that we tag on to everything that we're talking about, and then we inject, as you put it, Drew, these big ideas that we have and contextualize them to the things that people are losing sleep over, the things that they do talk about over a beer.
Okay. So all that makes sense. And, as you said, none of this should be rocket science. But I think one thing that would help right now is just say, you at Uberflip are doing content for Uberflip and it's driving business, or it isn't. And is there some things that you can point to? I mean, let's take the content post that, while it got attention, can you sort of link that back to more conversations and ultimately getting some business, or is there some other part of your marketing process that has been really successful for your brand to sell your brand?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a couple of things that we've definitely done to link people back, as you put it, from our content. And when I say our content, it's everything we do. If I'm out doing a keynote, I can't talk about Uberflip, right? And no one wants to book me to get up there and talk about my technology. I'm talking about trends that are happening in the market, such as what's happening with Netflix and Spotify, and what can we learn from those examples. But what we need as a result is we need frameworks that we can drive people to. So one of the things that we worked a long time on here was we developed a framework in talking to a lot of our customers, a lot of the best practices that we used ourselves. And this framework is a big part of that book that I mentioned that I wrote called Fuck Content Marketing, Focus on the Content Experience. So the second part of the book gives this framework, and it's a 5-step process that starts with, the first step is to centralize and organize all the content that you have so that you can start to leverage content at scale. So it's one thing to be out there and be renegade and say this doesn't work, but at the end of the day, I think as you're hitting on, we have to drive it back to then what, right? Like if we capture your attention and you actually say, you know what, this is pretty interesting, what is that alternative? What is it actually going to look like? And that's where we're able to point people. And our big thing is to get people to download that framework. Now, the key thing for us is no different than when I give a keynote, I can't talk about Uberflip, is we didn't want a framework that only worked if you had Uberflip. So what we did was we really made sure that we could explain to people how they could leverage content at scale, even if they weren't ready to invest in a content experience platform. Like if they're still at that hack away at thing stage, how can they do it just as well? So I think that's been a really big thing for us. If people want to take a look at that framework and the mindset around it, they can go to uberflip.com/CE, content experience CE, and they can download that framework. It's 5 steps, really simple concept to walk people through. And I think all of us need that rallying cry, if you will, for how our business ties to that renegade moment that we're trying to have out there.
Very cool. Okay, we'll link to that in the show notes. We're going to take a quick break. And then when we come back, we're going to talk about the top 10 mistakes that content marketers are making every single day. So stay with us. Did you know that Renegade Thinkers Unite was ranked number 2 of the top 10 podcasts for CMOs by Crackerjack Marketing? Wow, we're really honored. Now, we couldn't do that without amazing guests, and we've had some amazing CMOs on this show, and also terrific listeners like you all. If you like what we do here, please subscribe on your favorite podcast player. That way, you'll never miss an episode. Also, as a special thanks, I'd like to send you a free ebook on Renegade Thinkers. Now, for that, just email drew@renegade.com. Now, let's get back to the show. So let's focus for now on the negative. I know it's a dark place to go towards the end of the show, but I see it every day. And part of it is I don't see it because the content that you get is so bad. It's regurgitated stuff. So rather than me list all the things the problems I have with a lot of the content that I have, let's talk about from where you're sitting. What are the most common mistakes that folks are making?
Yeah, it's a great question, Drew. And I'm not going to go with the stuff you always hear, right? We always hear about, listen to your audience, write for your audience, write better content. Yeah, that's all important. Go look up Ann Handley at Marketing Profs, Jay Barrett, Convince and Convert. They'll tell you all about ways to write better for your audience. what I think we should focus on here is what happens after we finish that post. How are we actually going to bundle up this content for our audience? And that's the important part, because today our buyers, they spend so little time with sales reps, right? They spend all their time on their own doing their research, and that research needs to lead them from one place to another, right? Like the example I always give is that we can often learn from public social platforms, say like LinkedIn or Instagram or Facebook, right? I don't know about you, Drew. I told you already, I'm a LinkedIn guy. I go there and I do this almost every night. I'm like, I'm just going to go to that news feed and see what's going on. And what I find is I say 5 minutes I'll spend, and 20 minutes later, I'm still scrolling through, right? It's just it's that infinite scroll experience that gets us rolling through. And we do that on Instagram. We do that on Facebook. We do that on pretty much, even if we're dating these days, we do that, right? So it's the way that we've come to expect to find content. And a lot of that has to do with experience. So what we did here at Uberflip is we realized that we had a real big opportunity to learn about what people were doing wrong and what they were doing right. So we actually leveraged our data science team. So our product has a data science functionality, but we got them to help on the marketing side for a couple months. And what we did was we analyzed data from 440 of our customers who had really good, strong, high engagement of these mid-market enterprise companies. And we said, okay, what is leading to really good engagement, and what things are they doing that's maybe leading to bad engagement? And we ended up with actually 10 different findings in that report. I'll hit on maybe a few of them that I think have some of the key takeaways that you're looking for. Does that work?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, beautiful. So one of them really ties into this idea of having a path, right? Like, what direction are you going to find yourself on next? And we're seeing this. I mean, I used to just talk about Netflix from the perspective of how well they queued up that next piece of content for us, so that we would, binge through Stranger Things season 2 in a weekend, right? Now that path is even changing. I don't know, Drew, have you watched Bandersnatch?
I have not. No.
You got to watch Bandersnatch. These things, to be honest, I didn't love the movie. But the premise and the concept, if you haven't seen it, it's like an interactive movie, no different than the Choose Your Own Adventure books that we read as kids, done as a movie where we actually choose our path.
Right.
And that's what our audience wants. They want you to line up an interesting next step, right? So let's look at one of the things that we all do. And if you're a CMO, you probably got there through some sort of marketing role. So you're probably guilty of what I'm going to tell you, which is, we all learn things like, okay, it's going to take 7 pieces of content, which is an IDG stat, until you're ready to buy from us. So what we'll do is we'll use our marketing automation platform, and we'll send you 7 emails, or maybe we'll send 9 because we think we can get you to open 7 of 9. And as long as we do that over a 7-week period, then over that 7-week period, you'll be ready to buy from us, right? I mean, that's how we grew up thinking about email. And, some of us would accelerate the emails if they were being opened quickly, if we were really advanced. But that in itself is flawed. That is ripe for disruption, because the opportunity that Netflix has showed us is when we are done that first post that you linked us to in the email, we don't want to wait another week to get the next email. We want to binge it. We want that next asset served up to us right in line. And we want to start to be able to inject recommendations into our content. So I think one of the things that a lot of us are doing is we're linking people to dead ends, right? If you watch Bandersnatch, there's actually a dead end, right? It's one of these paths that I feel like they did intentionally, where you've got to, and I don't want to ruin the movie, but you've got to choose, whether you do A or whether you do B. And if you do A, the movie just ends. It's like, it shouldn't end there, but they're like,
sorry, you lose.
We don't have another, next step for you. And we do that as marketers, right? We send people to a piece of content. They're like, that was really interesting, but I downloaded this as a PDF and I'm off your site. So I'm going to go back to my inbox now and be distracted by the other 20 emails that came in while I read this ebook.
And you have this. So basically what you're saying is, you've got my attention. You're lucky enough to get my attention. And since I'm interested in this thing, don't waste that opportunity by simply saying, hey, it was nice of us to do it, and just let it alone and wait until the sales guy call. But have another path forward or a couple paths forward so they can choose their own adventure, as you're saying. By the way, I have to, so, everything that's old is new again. There's a famous film director named William Castle, who was the guy who did the movie The Tingler, where he had his seats wired so kids were going to matinees. And whenever, there'd be electric shock on the screen, the seats would be electric shock. And he had a movie where you got to choose whether the main character died or not. And they had two projectors set up in the room. So depending on which the audience chose, he either died or he didn't. So anyway, it's funny that idea just can't go away. But I think the point is really well taken. In order to do what you're talking about, you really need to understand, and I think some of your writing, you really need to understand the target and their journey and their needs and so forth. Now, I know that if I had Brent Adamson on this show, who's from Gartner, he'd say, yeah, that's fine, but that's one moment at a time, and that's only one person of the 5.4 people in the buying committee. What else are you doing? I mean, and so I'm good with that. I like that idea. So I'm binging. So let's go back to, all right, that's a big point, the path. I get it. That's really cool. Yeah. Wait, give me a couple more as we because we're running out of time. Sure. A couple sort of key insights, mistakes that can be turned around into positive things. Yeah, sure. So first off, I'm going to scare the shit out of you because last I heard that 5.4 number is 6.8. Yeah. So no, it's only getting harder. Oh, it's only getting harder. I know. And in fact, I'm actually doing an interview with Brent soon, and we're gonna see if there's an update on that number because I've heard as high as 7. So yeah, and it depends on who's measuring, I guess, is the key here. So it lines up though. I mean, your question there lines up another great thing that we hear a lot. And I'll give you a different analogy first. I love stories, as you can tell. So let's use Spotify. I'm a big Spotify fan. I think it's an amazing app, amazing UI, UX type of output that they've got there. And there's some really interesting things going on with Spotify. I mean, for one, take a look. There's a report that Mary Meeker did. Mary Meeker does this internet trends report. She's from Kleiner Perkins. And she looked at personalization, right, which is what we're going to talk about here. And she saw that in a 3-year period from 2014 to 2017, Spotify managed to increase the number of unique artists that we listen to from 68 a month to 112 per month, right? Like, let me assure you, the music isn't better, right? Like, it has not gotten better from 2014 to 2017, no matter who you follow. It's the same music, good or bad, depending on your definition. But what Spotify does is they deliver content that is personalized for us. Like, in fact, when you open up the Spotify app, it says made for Drew or made for Randy, right? So you can have 1,000 people in the room and they are handpicking that content that matters for us. Now, they do this through algorithms, but they actually have real people. Like, our jobs are not gone. They have real people in the background who are helping to curate this music and pick this. And I think that's something that we can learn a lot from. And it's what you hit on, Drew. It's this idea that, like, we have all these different buyers we need to engage with as we sell our products. What are we doing to personalize? Because to my first point, having that infinite scroll is not enough. What a lot of us do is a big mistake is we say, okay, I want to lead them to this blog post that I've got, right? Because it's a kick-ass blog post. It nails it. Maybe it's my fuck content marketing blog post, right? That's so good and everyone should read it. But the problem that most of us do is when they go to read that, right? I wrote that blog post like 14 months ago, okay? The next blog post that they're going to read is the one that I published 14 months and 1 day ago, right? And that may not make sense. That may not be the journey that this individual needs, depending on the vertical they're in, the industry they're in, the role they have in that organization. Remember, they're just one of the 4-point or 5-point or 6.8 buyers that we've got to interact with in our company. So the question at the end of the day is, what are we going to do to create that same made for Randy experience when we open up our website, when we open up our email, because that's what our audience expects.
And if we can deliver that type of experience, we'll start to connect with people and they won't jump off of our site.
So we basically, it's CFOs who like this content also like this content. If in an ideal world, it would be left-handed CFOs living in Toronto who like this content, also would like that. So you'd have this sort of wonderful sort of AI-based way of getting someone to see content that was relevant. So it's a lot of good tagging and smart serving up and very
cool. The
Uh,
content experience framework I referenced earlier, kind of gives that template for how do I do this time and time again. But, just to build on what you just hit on there very quickly, definitely what's right for left-handed and right-handed CFOs to your analogy. But we also want to get to the point of the CFO at Coca-Cola versus the CFO at John Deere, right? They're different industries. So they may care about very different things, right? Or, selling to a CFO in a certain, B2B tech versus consumer packaged goods. We are getting to the level now where we are personalizing these experiences to the account level, right? This is another point where we would take a shot at tequila if we were, every time we talk about account-based marketing. It is a reality that this is the expectation on the other side. And we have to rise to that and figure out ways to achieve that scale.
All right. I get it. I'm with you. We're anytime you can personalize content, anytime you can continue the journey, you're doing a smart thing, because in theory, they're ready to binge. If the content was good enough the first time, chances are they might want to read more because obviously they're interested in the subject. And I think that's a fresh way of thinking about content, is this sort of combination of things. I know everybody's been thinking about customer journey for a long time and a progression, but you're right. They tend to divide it. Oh, well, I got my ABM campaign and week 1, week 2, week 3, they're going to read the white paper and then we're going to send them this and we're going to send them that. And what you're saying is, no. Make this thing so they can binge it at the same time, right then when they're interested. And while you're at it, make sure that you have enough content to customize it to all your possible targets. Okay, which begs the question, 2 questions. One, it could end up being, we're doing some research for my next book, and right now the average CMO that we've surveyed has like 9 different personas that they target and 4 or 5 vertical markets. So next thing you know, that's 45 different pieces of content, and that's just sort of day 1. Then you have this other issue of, well, how do you make sure that the same brand story and same big brand idea, like in your case, sort of this notion of customer marketing experience, how do you make sure when you have 9 personas and 5 different verticals that you're actually consistent? And how do you create all of that stuff cost effectively?
Yeah, it is a great question. There's no perfect answer. When you get to a certain scale, it does break. But I would argue that I think a lot of us get overwhelmed at thinking that every bit of content we deliver has to be custom, right? Now, let's go back to my Spotify analogy. 1,000 people in the room, we all open up Spotify. We have this made for Randy, made for Drew experience. It's often the same songs, right? Like, they're not writing songs for me quite yet, right? They're not, tweaking the story as we go, nor is Netflix.
Right. But here's the difference. And this is the thing that's important. I love that analogy and I love the opportunity to personalize. But the difference is Spotify doesn't have to create any content. That's why they're just grabbing from an infinite pool of existing content.
Absolutely.
We, the marketer, can't go and grab it because we're not Google. That's what they do. Again, a great business model when you don't have to create it and you just have everybody else's content. Oh, wait, that's Facebook too, right? And Instagram. But marketers, in theory, are out in the business, have made themselves editorial. They're their own publishers. It's like in the old days when they created TV shows. Now they're trying to create content like a TV show that someone will want to watch and consume and do it on a multiple scale. And so it's different than the Spotify example in that, Spotify doesn't have to pay for it. I'm not saying they're not genius.
I agree. No, I agree. It's a good challenge. It's that question of what are we going to personalize and what are we not? I think that's where I was trying to get there is, we do have to create the content. Don't get me wrong. But we don't have to create, if it takes 7 pieces of content, not every one of our buyers needs 7 unique pieces of content. And what I encourage people to do in this example, let's continue to talk like ABM mindset, is, start thinking who your focus is, right? And the key word there is focus, because, if you're going to choose your top 20 accounts, top 10 accounts, or top 200 accounts, depending on how you define ABM, there should be some sort of focus there, ideally by industry, vertical, role type, where we can start to create content that's going to work for our buyer. Then what we can do is when we start to tier out these accounts, our top 10 accounts, maybe they're the ones who are going to get some true custom content, right? And we get to that once we get to that level of scale. And this is the big difference between being a company the size of Microsoft and being a company that's looking for their first $1, $5, $10 million of revenue, right? I think a lot of us go to market and we say, we're going to be everything to everyone because we have this amazing product that we've launched. But the reality is that we have to start with focus before we start to think about scale sometimes. And that I think is the biggest thing. I always give this example. A customer who works with us, this guy Daniel, at a company called Snowflake, Daniel Day. And one of the really cool things that he did was they wanted to start to deliver pages of content that were more tailored to the accounts that they were trying to land. So he went out and he literally created a dozen of these, somewhere between 12 and 20 from what he's told me. And they just wanted to see if it was going to work. So they handpicked content, they wrote a little bit of custom content in there, and they kind of put it out in the wild. And before he knows it, he's being pulled into exec meetings because they're saying, like, we've never seen this level of engagement with these accounts. What is happening here, right? And, he explains it to them. They're like, beautiful. We want 300 of these next quarter. He's like, beautiful, back at you, but
it ain't going to happen.
How are we going to? No, he actually said, so here's what he said. He goes, the key is, and I like people to think like this: people, process, and technology. Right? It's a great, proven, way to think about how to approach a challenge. The people part, always start with hiring good people is what I say. A process like the content experience framework I mentioned, like other frameworks, will help us figure out how we're going to scale this. And then the last part we bring in is technology. I think a lot of people make the mistake. They just say, well, I'll technology the shit out of this thing and we'll figure it out, right? We need good people. We need, a process. If you have that in place, it's a lot easier to start to lay technology in to achieve that scale.
Love it. All right. I'm going to attempt to wrap all this up and then I'm going to wrap up the show, but I want you to know that if you want to stay on after my wrap up, we're going to do another 10 minutes just on podcasting because we're here and we're two podcasters and I want to share some of that. So that'll be a bonus at the end of this thing. Okay. So here's what I picked up and there's a lot to this and we're going to have a lot more in the show notes to link to. But first and foremost, you better have a strong point of view. It helps if a real person, it's like if your CMO is if you're the CMO with a strong point of view and you can express it and lead and evangelize, go you. The notion of personalization obviously has always been critical in marketing in terms of targeting and speaking to the target. What was new to me in the notion of thinking about this content was binging. Love that notion. Binge on the content. Make it easy for folks to go from one piece of content to the other, and so that they can go as far as they want to go and choose their own adventure. Number 4, to keep it all hold together, there should be some focused. And I guess number 5 would be, and I love this, and it's really smart, is tech last, not first, folks. Tech last. Figure out all this other stuff then. So, Randy, thanks so much for this part of the show. I really appreciate you sharing your wisdom. I wish we had another hour because I know we could cover it.
This is fun, Drew. Thanks so much for having me on.
My pleasure. And so we're going to have a real ending here, which is, to all the great listeners. Thank you as always for staying with us to this point. And until next week, keep those renegade thinking caps on and strong.
This has been Renegade Thinkers Unite, but it doesn't end there. Just go to renegadethinkersunite.com for more and subscribe to the show. That way, you'll never miss an episode. We'll talk with you next time on Renegade Thinkers Unite.